Hello, and welcome to the Corporate Leadership Roundtable, What It Takes for Black Executives to Succeed in the C-Suite. I'm Elisa Gumbs, the Vice President and Deputy Chief Content Officer at Black Enterprise, and I'm excited for us to get into this important conversation about representation for Black professionals at the highest levels of corporate America. We have a powerhouse panel joining us, so I'm going to get right to it. Please welcome Najma Atkinson, the Chief People Officer at Hasbro, Malaika Myers, the Chief Human Resources Officer at Hyatt Hotels, and Michelle Taylor-Jones, the Global Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at Manulife Financial and John Hancock. Ladies, thank you all so much for being with us here today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure
for having me.
I want to start with your professional journeys. What got you to where you are now and what you had to overcome to get there? Naj, I'm going to start with you. You spent 23 years at Dell and then made the leap to the C-suite when you left for Hasbro about a year ago. What was that like?
I can say it was exciting and a little bit scary, but it's been a fantastic ride. You know, if you ask me what's gotten me here, I always tell everyone the road is never straight and narrow. And the things that have gotten me here are those things that have sustained me my entire life. It's been that ability to be flexible, that ability to be comfortable with change, my positive attitude, frankly, and to know that I actually, frankly, had a wonderful source, a network holding me up. You cannot do this by yourselves. And I definitely did not get to this seat by myself. I have a fantastic team that I work with now. I had one that I worked with Dell. And then one of those individuals that has been one of my best partners in crime, Michelle Taylor-Jones, is joining me today. So those are just a little bit of things that have gotten me here, just my people.
We're going to get to the good people, Michelle, in just one second. But if you have to think about the things that you had to overcome in order to make it to the C-suite, what does that look like for you?
For me, it's probably been around patience because I don't have any. But understanding that in order to really be prepared for this opportunity, you really want to make sure that you have the right skills and capability to build that breadth of experience. If you are an individual, like I'm sure many of the individuals on the panel are, we're really focused on our career and we're really driven for success. And so success is defined in different ways. And so I really had to learn to be patient, to get the experiences that I needed to acquire to sit in the seat. Go through some opportunities of learning, meaning I failed. I always say that failure is the first attempt in learning. And so being comfortable with that failure and working through that and not letting the failure define me or some of the things that I had to do. And then really taking a chance on myself. So while I had an illustrious career at Dell Technologies, I knew that if I wanted to continue to grow that career, I was more than likely going to have to leave Dell Technologies. And so taking risk and betting upon myself for those things, one of the other things that I had to do to move forward.
Michelle, you're also relatively new at your current company, having been with Manulife for the past 2 years. After a long diversity career at Dell and MassMutual, tell us about your climb up the corporate ladder.
So thank you for the question and thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. I think it's similar to some of what Najma mentioned. But for me, mostly, I think it's having a coach and a mentor and a sponsor that believed in you. And I know she doesn't know I'm going to do this, and I'm probably going to embarrass her, but that's okay. At Dell, Najma was the highest ranking Black woman at the company. And for me, she played the role of coach, mentor, sponsor, and sister. And that was huge. It was huge in terms of giving yourself permission to fail and make mistakes and know that you had a warm net that was there to be firm when you needed to hear that message, but to also celebrate the small wins. I think we focus a lot on celebrating the big wins. And for me, it was having a Najma that prepared me for the table that God had set for me, which is where I am right now.
And of course, I have to ask you about the challenges that you overcame to get where you are.
Sure. I always raised my hand for the assignments that no one else wanted. And I always had friends that said to me, why would you do that? I said, because it's a priority for the company. It's highly visible. And I'm going to push myself because I know when it's highly visible, failing is not an option for me. I may stumble, but to flat out fail, I just won't. And so I've always pushed myself in that direction, and acquiring some of those key programs that I put myself in, I really had the ability to be noticed. And I really had some senior folks raise their hand to sponsor me without asking, because I proved myself. So it's proving yourself before you're asked to do it. I think that's the turning point for a lot of folks.
Malaika, you've been at Hyatt for 5 years now, and before that, you had a varied corporate experience. 10 years at Pepsi, 7 at Diageo, plus some time at chemical companies and a consumer products company. Tell us about your path to the C-suite.
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing about my path to the C-suite is I didn't set out to achieve the C-suite. So I always find, I look around some days and think, wow, this was not, it took a long time for this to become my goal. And in particularly the early part of my career, I always tell people I was just trying not to get fired. Like, I wanted to do a good job. I was one of those folks that put their heads down and just said, I need to produce good work that I could be proud of. And so my journey has been maybe one around discovering, how far I could go, how far I wanted to go. And I was really fortunate that although I wasn't thinking about, 10 years down the line or where I might end up, I had some people around me, just as these ladies just described, who were thinking about that for me, and who were pointing me in different directions and providing that safety net, that warm safety net that Michelle just talked about, that you need because you are going to stumble along the way. So I think at a certain point, I realized that I was capable of running a function, and I wanted to end up in the C-suite, but I would tell you that was well into my journey.
Michelle and Naj have already shared with us some of the challenges they face. What are some of the obstacles that you faced along your path?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is what I just referenced, which is like, I didn't have the aspiration. And I think it's a lot easier actually when you have a clear destination that you're headed towards, right? You can chart that path. When you don't start out with that aspiration, you do what I did, I guess, which is I got lucky. I did really good work. So it's not even mostly luck. I did really good work. I should start there. But I also got fortunate by the people that I was around and built my confidence over time. I think probably my biggest obstacle was I just didn't even start out with the confidence that I could achieve something like the C-suite.
Malaika, you said something that I hear from so many Black professionals, which is that, they set out to do good work and they thought if they just put their head down and worked hard and had good results, then they would get where they wanted to go. And then I speak to so many people who have made it there and they said, that's not really how it works. Yeah. So I'm going to ask all of you to share some of the things that were a surprise to you or that maybe you had to unlearn in order to, get to that top level.
Well, maybe since I mentioned that I don't mind starting, I would say hard work only gets you so far. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably the biggest lesson. It's not that you get to stop doing hard work or doing things well. You have to continue that. But there's a point at which that stops being even the main criteria for your advancement. And if you miss that inflection point, you can continue to do great work and not advance because you haven't focused on building relationships. You haven't focused on increasing your visibility. There are other things that are part of the package to achieving these kind of roles beyond just hard work.
Naj, you are nodding your head over there. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I will just add to what Malaika said. Hard work is the ticket to entry, as she was saying. It is absolutely getting comfortable. And you find this with a lot of diverse talent, specifically women of color. We hesitate to talk about the work that we're doing. We hesitate to talk about the impact that we're having on the organization. And what we've got to learn to do, and I had to learn to do, is to tell my own story. I had to understand that the work that I was doing was absolutely driving the bottom line and driving the strategic efforts and initiatives. And so your 5-minute speech, when someone meets you and they say, tell me a little bit about you and what are you interested in, don't hesitate to answer that question. You tell them very directly what you want to do. At least in the last conversation we had, I told Michael Dell what job I wanted to have, and he was able to help me get that job. I'm not sure that I would have gotten that opportunity. And so we're all, really at a place where now people are looking for you to have a position and a perspective. So your ability to say, this is who I am, this is the value that I have to this organization, and here are the things that I want to do and where I want you to invest in me. People are looking for that. So we all need to have that 5-minute speech of your ability to do that. And the second thing Michelle said, and I'm going to bring it back to that, Michelle, you have to have sponsorship. We all need sponsorship. We all need sponsorship to help us get to the next level. We need sponsorship to help open doors for us. We need sponsorship to make sure that we get those opportunities that we're seeking. And so if those are two pieces of advice, that I could provide, is be able to tell your story and your value, get a sponsor, not a mentor, a sponsor that can get you the next opportunity at the next level that you're seeking.
Alisa, I would just add one last piece, and that is, what is your brand? So not the brand that you think you have, but how are you known in the organization and to others? I think that's also critical in building that full package, is kind of understanding the brand that you want to have and making sure that you check in with your personal kitchen cabinet, if you will, which is what I call mine, as well as a lot of your sponsors and mentors, to make sure that their brand and how they think of you is in alignment in how you want to be remembered as well. I think that's a critical piece also.
Najma seconded Michelle's point about sponsors and how absolutely essential they are to advancement. But unlike a mentor, you can't walk up to someone and say, will you be my sponsor? So for those executives out there who are looking to gain sponsorship in order to advance, what is the best way to attract a sponsor?
I've always just done the work. And I believe in that. Do the work, do it well, deliver the results, and I promise you, the rest will come. What you can't do is knock on a sponsor's door with an empty cup. When I knock on that door, my cup is overflowing. I've done this, I've done that. This is what I'm doing next week. This is what I'm doing in 6 months. Make sure your cup is full, and I promise you, you will be noticed.
Yeah, I would just add to that, because I fully agree. The other thing sponsors need is real clarity about what you're trying to achieve, where you want to go.
Yeah.
So you should be spreading that far and wide. Like, don't be afraid. Maybe this is Najma's point to tell people not only what value you bring, but where you want to deliver more value, what more you think you could do, not in a way that's bragging, but just in a way that's educating and sharing with people. Here's what I aspire to. Here's how I think I could provide more value. Because sponsors need that information if they're really going to advocate for you in those, behind those closed doors.
Naj, you brought up being a woman of color, and we didn't set out to have a panel of all women today, although I'm thrilled that it ended up that way. Beyond the realities of being a professional of color, how has being a Black woman affected any of your journeys to the C-suite, and how have you navigated that?
I mean, we live in a world where there's some obviousness of when people first interact with you and first see you, this is what they see. They see that I am a woman of color. And so For me, and those of you that know me, like I love it and I embrace it, because I think that's when you really truly think about what true diversity means in an organization. It's allowing me to show up in my whole true authentic self. What I had to learn is sometimes my whole true authentic self is more appropriate at the house than it is in my office building. And so I had to balance that just a little bit and understand that there are times when I'm representing the company, like as the chief people officer, there may be situations or circumstances where I've got to think through myself, I'm representing the best interest of Hasbro. And I've got to think about the best interest of Hasbro while educating and informing them, bringing my perspective and my truth to that discussion so that we can get to a better situation. Folks ask me, have you faced biases? I'm certain, yes, I'm certain that I've faced biases and understandings, particularly not only am I a Black woman, I'm a Black woman who went to a historical Black college and university. And so there are some assumptions around what I could bring to the table, but I never really let those things stop me. Again, I had a great support system and I didn't let people's definition of me define me. I defined myself, and that's how I brought myself to the table. And I've also made myself very open to individuals who don't look exactly like me or have the same perspectives or backgrounds that I do. We have a good open dialogue. And so I really make myself very open to those dialogues and the conversations that we have, so we can advance where we all need to go together, because I don't think that it's just an issue for me to address or to be responsible for. It's one for the community. And so I really make sure that we've got that community of practice.
Malaika, how have you navigated being a Black woman in the C-suite?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Naj just said. And I suppose for me, I think about it as leaning into the difference. I mean, I think when I started out, I realized pretty quickly that I was just never going to be the norm. Right? I was so far from the norm. There was no hope of me really blending in. I wasn't going to blend in. And it took me a while to get comfortable with that. That I couldn't blend in, that wasn't going to happen. And then at a certain point, I just realized, well, if you're not going to blend in, you might as well just be who you are, because trying to continue to force fit yourself into something else is painful and it's frustrating. So I've just learned to just lean into yep, I'm the only Black woman in the room. I'm the only woman of color in the room, or sometimes I'm only woman. Fortunately at Hyatt, I'm not the only woman in this woman on the C-suite, but there are still times when I am the only woman in the room, or I'm the only person of color in the room. And I've learned to just lean into it, and to where I think it's appropriate to speak that truth as a woman, as a person of color. Here's the perspective that I bring. But I think my biggest advice to people would be, please don't try to be something that you're not, because it won't work and you won't be happy actually if you attempt to do that.
Michelle, you and I were just having this conversation, and you pointed out that there are things that Black women have to think about that no one else does.
Yeah. And I can talk a little bit more candidly about that. And so I went on vacation, and as we often do, I got my hair braided so that I did not have to deal with all that we have to deal with. Now, my daughter said to me, don't you think you're overanalyzing this? I said, well, I'm not. I need to figure out, am I taking out these braids before I step back into that office, or am I keeping it in? And I really thought long and hard, and I asked myself, if the chief diversity officer of this company cannot wear her braids into the office for another week after vacation and feel comfortable in her heritage and who she is, then nobody should feel comfortable. So it was an absolute conscious decision to do that. Now, it was received well, but I will tell you, I turned on my Teams camera Monday morning, not knowing what to expect. Never in my career have I done that before. And so what that said to me, and what I said to myself was, Michelle, you are so finally comfortable with all of you And I was so happy in that moment that whether they liked it or they didn't, I was perfectly fine with it. And I think it's a process to get to that place. But when you get to that place, it's freeing. Yeah.
As HR and DEI executives, you ladies are always on the front lines, but never more so than over the last couple of years, since the summer of 2020 and the racial justice movement. Tell us what you think has actually changed since then in the corporate DEI landscape, and what work still needs to be done when it comes to advancing Black talent to senior positions.
You know, I think we are at a crossroads, not just in the US, because I have a global team. We're a crossroads in the world. I think it was important, although sad, for us to witness George Floyd's murder in real time, because there are those of us in the world that still thought that it was a myth. And so it needed to play. I always say there's never any mistakes. It needed to play out just as it did. In doing that, as we all know, everyone came forward with these broad platitudes and goals and KPIs and commitments, which was wonderful. But what I also know is a lot of the companies have still yet to realize a lot of the commitments that were made, and that saddens me. I think we're at a crossroads because the world is somewhat quiet, and when it gets quiet, we start to forget. We get lulled back into this false safe of security that, you know, we've done some work for 2 years, we've done some training, we've set some goals, we've had some, you know, awareness building. I think it's critical at this juncture that as DEI professionals, as HR leaders, as executives, we have to continue to push this agenda, or we're going to slip back. I see it. And I think if we can't make a difference in this moment, in this time in the world, I don't know if we ever will. So I'm encouraged that there are a lot of organizations, and I will call up my organization, because it's not just words, it's resources, it's budget, it's action, it's the CEO's commitment to meet with the ERGs and the employees twice a year. It's the ELT members being executive sponsors and leaning into our ERG work. It's action. And so if you're not seeing actionable results in your organization, flags should be going up right about now.
Yeah, Michelle, I echo you in your comments. And what I could say is, you know, I am responsible for the people and culture strategy across our organization. But when I was looking at joining Hasbro, which was almost a year ago, October of this year will be a year, I looked into Hasbro and I wanted to make sure that their actions were reflective of their words. So if you look at our board, and if you look at our ELT, you will see that it reflects the words that we talk about from an inclusion perspective of the number of women and women of color that we have both represented for our board of directors and for our ELT members. Do we still have more work to do? Yes, we do. But we also have in place, before I got there, Brianna Boyer, our Chief Diversity Officer, put in place a diversity and equity accountability from a scorecard perspective that we measure each of our executive leadership team members against. We review that biannually with our board. We also have set up a steering committee, which I now co-chair, and I asked our brand new CEO to co-chair with me, and he was willing to do that. So Chris Cox and I both now chair our diversity equity steering committee, and we've got leadership and representation from all of our ELT members. And each of our ELT members is responsible for having someone that they mentor and sponsor. So we put in a different level of accountability there as well. We also have talent assessments that we go through. In our talent assessments, we talk about our talent, all talent, But yes, we've got to focus on those who have not necessarily been represented to make sure that we've got development plans in place for everyone and that we've got specific actions and actionability that we are taking. And like you, we've got a huge investment in the community as well. So it's not just about what we do inside of Hasbro, but what we do philanthropically for our communities, working with Black Girls Code and some of the products that we produce that you'll see. Magic the Gathering had a specific card set that they put out, that Black is Magic. So we really want to make sure that we are representing who we are and our true values internally as well as externally. And I think that those things are critically important. And I wouldn't have joined an organization if I did not think that they were going to be committed to do that.
Malaika, what are you seeing? Have we made any real change over the past 2 years?
I would say absolutely. And I certainly would say that here at Hyatt. And I can echo a lot of the comments that Michelle and Naj just made in terms of some of the actions, the global councils, the ERGs. We've connected our aspirations to long-term compensation for our executive team. And I think importantly, one of the things that we did when George Floyd was murdered is we stopped and just said to ourselves, okay, are we doing enough? Are we pushing hard enough? And we looked and said, the answer to that is no. So how do we set a more bold aspiration for where we're trying to get to? And we did that under something we call Change Starts Here. But it really described like where we wanted to be in 2025. And every quarter we talk about where are we against that aspiration. It also gave our colleagues something to rally behind. So this year, both in 2021 and this year in 2022, we asked every incentive eligible colleague to have one of their goals be around how they were supporting Change Starts Here, which really gets more, the numbers and metrics are really important, but you also actually want to get people engaged and change the culture. And we focused a lot on helping people understand, here's the little thing you could do, people manager or individual contributor, to help make this a more inclusive organization. So lots of the same stuff that Naj and Michelle talked about. And if I take it outside of the Hyatt context, and you've got 3 great examples here, I would say some of the things that I think have moved is the conversation about transparency. Mm-hmm. So a lot more organizations now, because they've made such bold statements, feel accountable to actually say, well, how are we doing? So you see a lot more organizations with DEI reports. We just issued our 2nd annual one, being very transparent, or more transparent at least, around what they're doing and what progress they're making. And I think that's a win for our society when we see that happen. And a lot of companies, while there are still gaps, I'm sure, when I talk to my peers, I hear this conversation still being very active. So I don't hear okay, that's yesterday's news, let's move on to the next thing. This is still a very active conversation, not just amongst HR execs, but I know it's true when I talk to my boss among CEOs. So I think we've done, at least so far, a decent job of keeping this on the front burner. And making sure that we continue to talk about how we make progress. And between that and the accountability and really being transparent about the progress we're making, I actually feel a little bit more optimistic around, what change we can actually create.
When we talk about the work that still needs to be done, I'd like us to talk a minute specifically about the roles you each play in the decision-making and recommendation process for executives to be placed on the C-suite track. Naj or Malaika, what changes are you trying to influence as the chief people and chief HR officers at your organizations when it comes to that, tracking Black executives for the C-suite?
Well, go ahead. No, Malaika, go ahead.
Well, I'd say first and foremost, obviously, maybe it goes without saying, we'd like more Black executives. We'd like more executives of color. We'd like more women. So we get opportunities across, and that's our aspirations are covering all of those, but we have a very specific set of aspirations around Black executives. So we call that out. And my role is to help us figure out how do we do that. So we've done everything from digging far lower in the organization to try to identify talent earlier, to say, who are the Black first level managers or initial executive roles that they might be in. And let's talk more specifically about what we think they could do in the future. We've got mentoring going on with those individuals as well. So making sure that we're giving them the right support mechanisms to help pull them through. So the actions, and from a personal standpoint, one of the benefits, I think, the blessings of being in these kind of roles is you're in the room. Right. And so I'm in the room and can say, what about Joe? What about Jane? And, let's have a conversation about what their future might look like. I think the one other thing that I would add, which goes to, frankly, anybody we're trying to pull through the pipeline, but I think even more so for people who've been historically underrepresented, is we're trying to also change the path. Right. There's sometimes this sort of, well, you have to do job A, then job B, then job C. And there's this not written down anywhere, but it is the way people move through the organization. And I think for everyone, we have to think much more flexibly about how people gain the experiences and the skills that they need to advance into the most senior roles. And that opens up, when we do that, what we find is that actually opens up the opportunity for more people. So that's the other thing we're focused on, is trying to bust the myths that are out there about these are the 4 jobs you have to do before you achieve, a senior level role.
Yeah, one of the other, in addition to what Malaika said, we've also done a couple of things. We've really focused on providing training for our executives to help them understand what mentorship and allyship means, so that they understand what those responsibilities are. As I mentioned, we've just done our first one, but 2 times a year we will do talent assessments. And we very specifically talk about talent and skills and experiences. But then we do the other half, which I think is where sometimes the processes fall down. We go communicate to those individuals how people assess them, what their opportunities are, what are the next things that they need to do to continue to progress in their career, or perhaps what are those blind spots that they may have. Because what I often find with individuals and people of color specifically is people are, for whatever reason, are hesitant to give that feedback. And so we teach them how to deliver that feedback and what the implications are of that feedback and how to be supportive and move them to the next level. We're also very deliberate around the types of roles that we put them in. I am with you, Malaika. I would love to see more women of color. I need them everywhere around me, but I need people of color in and out of the organization, specifically in those P&L responsibility roles as well. In order to advance our strategy, in order to appeal to our consumer, it is very important that we have individuals that reflect our consumers or our customer base. And so our ability and our deliberateness in ensuring that we've got the right type of talent in those pretty significant roles, like we just brought a phenomenal person, Kwamina, on. We got him from Nike. Kwamina is building our direct-to-consumer business. He is responsible for the Hasbro Pulse. Go online and look at it. And I have not seen anyone more passionate about that work than that gentleman. And so it is putting those types of individuals in those types of roles that significantly make a difference. And then I do get to ask the questions around the individuals, around questioning old tapes that may be played, and making sure that people are really fairly given chances and opportunities, and we've got a good reflection of our consumer base. Otherwise, we're not going to advance our strategy.
One of the pieces I would add is, in addition to asking during talent review or talent assessment, is diversity a part of the agenda? I go further and I ask, but what is your definition of diversity? Because if your definition of diversity is gender, and that is the only consideration during talent assessment, we need to broaden the definition. And that was one of the conversations I had to bring to the organization this year.
Yes, it underscores Malaika's point about how important it is for us to be in the room when these conversations are happening. Ladies, thank you so much for everything that you have shared. I wish that I could talk to you for like another hour, because you really are such experts on this and where we're going. But unfortunately, our time is up. So thank you, Naj, Malaika, and Michelle for sharing your journeys with us today, and for the work that you're all doing every day to make sure Black professionals have fair representation and equitable access to opportunities for advancement in corporate America. And thank you all out there for joining us. Keep watching for more great content from Black Enterprises, Equity in the C-Suite, and Boardroom Summit.